Perfect timing. All right. So, looks like we're live. Welcome everyone to the Coaching to Flourish podcast. I'm Raj Anderson. I am one of the coaches at Coach Training EDU and the Assessors. I'm also executive life coach with 23 years experience in people-centered services. John can't join us today because he's on vacation, I think, but I'm really excited because I'm here with Britt Fulmer, and we were just talking, weren't we, because it's the start of International Women's Month. So how perfect.
Amazing. It just worked out perfectly. John, I think, intentionally planned his vacation away so we could have this very women's empowerment moment here.
Absolutely, you timed it wonderfully. So I'm going to hand over to you though, Britt, to see what you've got for us today.
Yes, we've had lots of questions coming in from coaches in our classes and from our coaching community. And so the theme of today really feels a little bit like dealing with difficult participants or clients, so to speak. There's lots of different types of difficult or I hate the word difficult, or clients who have various challenges as we go through the coaching process. So exactly what I just said, that word difficult, what does that mean? What does that look like? So let's maybe start by just defining like, what are some of the red flags that we look for in clients who might be struggling, with their coaching process?
I am curious about this word difficult as well, difficult clients. So I know you said that there could be different categories, and we're going to explore that in a minute as to what could come up in a coaching session. But one of the things I was curious about, and I'm thinking about this myself, is what would make a client difficult for you, Britt?
That's a great question. I think the biggest struggle I have with clients is clients. So I'm a writing coach. I should probably start by saying that. So most of my clients are coming to me for writing projects. I have folks who are doing everything from fiction novels to workbooks to dissertations. So I really, I see a lot of different types of folks. And I think the most difficult client that I work with, or that I would potentially come across, is somebody who doesn't have a passion for the project that they're working on, or they're not really invested in it. And so that does make it really hard to craft well-designed actions and things that are going to help them move towards achieving that goal because they're not truly invested. So that's something, and I think that could relate to other niches as well, right? If your client is not invested in their own development, that can make sometimes the coaching process more challenging. So I think that's something, that's definitely like the first thing that comes to mind. And I think there's other things, negative personality or, having negativity towards the coaching process. I'm lucky that I haven't run into that at all with folks, but I'm sure that would also make some things more challenging as well. What about you, Raj? What would make a client challenging or difficult for you?
Yes. I do want us to think about, all of us, everyone that's listening as well, that when you think of what makes a difficult client for you, for us also to think about our map of the world and our lens as well. So it's not to say that there's not going to be, I don't like the word difficult either, so challenges or even, a lack of connection with a client. You might not be the right coach for them. If I'm thinking about this and looking at it from self-coaching as well, I would encourage anybody who's a coach to also think about the scenario and what might be coming up for you as to what is making this interaction or this engagement difficult, challenging, whatever it is that we want to call it. We'll continue using the word difficult for the sake of the question, because sometimes we might be bringing ourselves into a scenario as well. And this was some of the things that we explored in the inclusion coaching course. So even if you're thinking somebody's not following through, I know we're going to talk about accountability, whose lens are you looking at the scenario through? And is there something for you that causes discomfort? Perhaps you're working with somebody that you're not used to working with. Perhaps it's very different to what you've done before. Maybe it's triggering some of your own values. So I really do like to do self-coaching first when I look at things from this scenario. But if I'm thinking about answering the question as it is, I would say what would make a difficult coaching client for me is, as you said, somebody who isn't necessarily invested initially. And I use the word initially purposefully because our goal is always to see if we can bring people along with us. And for me, in executive coaching, I work with lots of organizations, and I'm a coach with a number of different institutes, universities, that kind of thing. And when an organization pays for a coaching program and invites the individual onto coaching, if it's something that they didn't ask for, you sometimes get clients that show up that are not interested, they're not engaged. They might be fearful as to, are they on a coaching program because of performance, for example? So I'm talking quite a bit here. I want to hear what your thoughts are, Britt.
Yeah, I love what you said about that self-coaching. It actually reminds me of a client interaction I had a few months ago, where he gives me permission to talk about him in my classes, but he came to the session saying, I'm going to be a difficult participant today, I think. And I thought, that's an interesting, what are you bringing? Like exactly like what you just said. So like he almost did some self-coaching to himself and was like false about how I would perceive that. So he thought that the way he was approaching his writing work was going to be frustrating for me, and it wasn't. And we were able to have a really good conversation about what have I done that made him feel like I might perceive this problem that he was facing as a difficult conversation. And we had a really good conversation about that. And I think it brought us closer together from that coach client perspective. So I really love what you were saying there, that it is really important to always self-assess first. So if you're seeing somebody as difficult, first of all, like what we're about to jump into in a minute here is just like, what type of difficulty are you facing? Is it something you can manage or not? But if it's more profound than that, I love what you said, that lens through which you're looking at it. And I love that you also said, like, I think that's one of the harsher realities of coaching is not every client is going to be the best fit for you. And so if you're looking at it through a lens that is impossible for you to break away from, the professional thing to do then would be to have a conversation about connecting them potentially with another coach that might be more suited or more of a fit for them. And that's the best thing that you can do for them in service of their goals. So I love that you said that. And I think it bleeds perfectly into some of these topics that we were talking about, or categories of difficult or challenges. And the first is clients who say, I don't know too much. Like actually, when you ask them the question, it's, I don't know. And they're really not giving a lot to the session. What are some strategies that you've used and to address that type of interaction in a coaching session?
Thanks, Britt. So we might be referring specifically to young people here as well, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't show up with adults or leaders or execs that I've coached as well. Most of you, if you've been listening to me, have probably heard me talk about this before, and I'm going to refer us to the Design the Alliance. So I know we're looking at this showing up in the session, I don't know. Yeah, one of the things I want everyone to think about is that real foundational piece of designing an alliance when you're working with a client. Because when you're designing the alliance, for me, that first hour, I'm going to spend a good 30 minutes of that first hour designing an alliance. And beyond what is coaching and, what does coaching mean, but really learning about the client. Because that is our opportunity, isn't it? Because we're not in a coaching session. That is our opportunity to connect with the individual. They can ask you questions about you, but also to learn about the client. So especially with young people, I do it with male execs as well. I do a lot of women in leadership work, but I feel that the style of coaching can be different and change. My clients always get an intake form where there's specific questions, but I also have background. Tell me about you. in that design the alliance, it helps me to learn and meet them in their world. You know, what are your interests? What are your hobbies? What do you like to do? What might you like to read? You know, in that, I can learn a lot about an individual, meeting them where they're at and catering coaching questions. So, for example, if anyone's going to chat to me, they'll know, I mean, even from my background, I'm spiritual. But I'm also going to tell you that I'm into superheroes, for example. Might be a surprise to people. Everyone knows I wear a Wonder Woman bracelet. Yet, it gives you a step into that person's world. So I find with young people, when I engage in that way, asking even about favorite movies or books or hobbies, you'll be able to cater your questions around some of those things. I was working with a leader once who I knew loved to bake, and she was really stuck with some strategy questions. So I asked her, what if leadership was a cake? And it connected with her. So thinking about creativity and connection points may help you to open up a client in a different way. They might then know, they might feel that they understand more. So that's the one piece that I wanted to share. And then the other thing is, we don't know what we don't know. So maybe they have never done any work on themselves in this way before. As I said, I work with execs who have not spent a lot of time on emotional intelligence or self-awareness. They've never asked themselves those questions. They've never had anyone ask those questions. And just as coaches, we train to be ACC, PCC, or MCC. That's the level the client's meeting you at. Like, I do a lot of work on myself. I still have a coach. I've been coaching for years. You know, you could go really deep with me and I'm going to want to explore. Yet when I first started out, I probably struggled to answer some of those questions. So we've got to really think about the level, once again, where are we meeting this client at? And for you to think about in that design the alliance as you learn about goals, that maybe initially you might have to offer a few more resources or tools. You're not advising, but you are facilitating someone's growth. What are your thoughts on that, Britt?
Yeah, I love what you're saying. It almost makes me think of like, you almost have to think about the type of I don't know. And what I mean by that is it, I don't know? Or is it, I don't know? And those are very different. Like, those both really require, I think, different strategies. I think the first, that reflective I don't know, usually comes a lot when you work with a client who isn't used to being asked these types of questions. No one has ever, coaching asks such deep, unique questions, and it's very rare that someone who has never gone through coaching before would have been asked these questions. And so the way that I sort of like to approach things is with silence most of the time. You know, I don't know. Okay. And like, let them just think about it. You know, these deeper questions don't often have a quick, easy answer. And so letting your client marinate on it for a few seconds. I remember one time I had a client and they were having a problem developing a character that they wanted for their story. And I said, what do you think your character is trying to tell you? Or why do you think your character is being difficult? It was something along those lines. And they were like, I don't know. But you could tell in the moment that they were like, I hadn't even like thought about my characters communicating back with me. And that's something very common we talk about in the writing world. But it was just this moment that I realized, like, they haven't been asked these questions. They're not there. These aren't things they're used to. So that's a better place to be. That silent place is where I tend to play with that reflective I don't know. But a frustrated I don't know, or an I don't know that feels like there's something more there, that's when I would rely more on direct communication. What would it take to know? Or what's it like not to know? What's missing? You know, or I'm sensing that there's some frustration here. What's behind that? So even some direct communication can help kind of tease out, and it helps you build that rapport with your client, because they can sense that you're listening and you're hearing them. You're not just moving past the I don't know because it's uncomfortable. So I think those are good strategies to use as well. So I'm curious to know, like, what do you think about those sort of the difference between those types of I don't knows.
I think that's brilliant, actually. Really brilliant thinking about the different types of I don't know. And I'm wondering if there might even be other I don't knows in there. As you said, it's for you as a coach to lean into that intuition as well, isn't it? And you also want to be listening out for any of the emotion that's around that I don't know. You know, I've worked with young people before who've shrugged their shoulders and like, I don't know, a bit disengaged, you know, or not connected to it. It's almost like, why are you asking me this question? I've had people say in frustration and anger that they don't know. And people who are fed up. I just don't know anymore. Mm-hmm. Which is a very different kind of I don't know, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we got to read the room, haven't we, as coaches?
Yeah, I think I think that seems to be the theme of dealing with these challenges is how are we reading and thinking about our client's experience? How are we continuing to be the student of our clients that we talk about so much? And so that sort of flows us into the next sort of challenge that coaches face, which is clients who either don't consistently follow up. So from week to week, they're just not doing their action steps. And then one step further, clients who are not doing their action steps, but always seem to have an excuse that sort of borders on like, oh, well, that sounds like a reasonable excuse, but they have a reasonable excuse like every week for the past 6 weeks. So how do you sort of delicately balance pushing them along when maybe they're facing something that's a little bit harder in their life? So I think those are like two groups of people who aren't doing their actions and how to sort of manage that in a coaching session.
What's the difference in those two for you?
I think for me, one is potentially kind of feeding into something that we might be talking about in a little bit, but the first one, like the people who don't consistently follow up and they don't have an excuse, sometimes I find it, again, it's the read the room piece of it a little bit, but sometimes I find that those are folks who maybe aren't quite ready for coaching yet, or, you know, there is something in their life that maybe they haven't disclosed to me yet that is like in a very real roadblock and is in the way. And so it's not that, so I almost feel like there's several different kinds, just like we were just talking about the I don't know, of the people who don't follow up on action. There's people who have a very, very real roadblock. There's people who have a perceived roadblock, but it's something we can work through. And maybe we just haven't gotten to that yet. And then there's the people who maybe are overwhelmed, intimidated, scared of their own progress. And so they're creating these excuses that on the surface seem plausible, but perhaps as a coach, if we broke them down, we might realize, well, I understand this thing happened, but it sounds like there was room here. Or so it's sort of managing the expectations, you know. And I'm curious too, you know, there's like from your perspective, there's so many different times, I'm sure in the executive space especially, there's lots of different challenges that folks are facing, and you know, probably lots of expectations on them. So what are some of the strategies you use to sort of manage when action steps aren't being followed?
And I think it's going back to also the design the alliance, direct communication, and having a checkpoint as well. You know, things, as you said, things may have changed, or maybe they're not where they were when they started. And sometimes we have to look at jet lag as well. Yeah, someone catches up with their growth and they have shifted or they've changed, and their mindset may be different to even when they started and the goals that they set with you. And then the new things that are coming up, maybe those actions that are coming up in the sessions are no longer aligned or relevant. So I have clients that we do a checkpoint and things have changed or shifted, or what they thought they initially wanted is not what they wanted, or who they are now is not the same as when we started our work together. So, you know, I think checkpoints are really good. I send like a midpoint reflection as well, or normally people sign up for a 10 session program and then they'll want to continue either for another 10 sessions. Sometimes people sign up for a subscription. Yeah, at that point, we always do a checkpoint as well, or they do their own reflection. We'll revisit the Design the Alliance. The other thing that I've observed working with execs who are a lot of doers is some themes. They typically can overcommit. So for you to look out as a coach as, yes, you're helping them with well-designed actions, but you're also looking at how realistic this is. You know, someone's telling you they've already got so much on their plate and they're overcommitted and life's really busy, and then they just set 15 actions for themselves and you just help them to set that. What's going to happen?
I love what you're saying. I could talk about what you just said for days without preparing. And I think what this really boils down to is self-awareness. Self-awareness of you as the coach. Are you aware enough of yourself and your abilities and how you're helping your client along? But also, like, I love what you said about jet lag, and I hadn't thought about that until you said it. But you're absolutely right. There's definitely going to be times where, as the client moves along in the process, they start to realize that maybe what they thought they wanted isn't actually what they wanted. I can say that from my perspective. When I first started my coaching program at CTEDU 4 or 5 years ago, however long ago that was, I went through the program and I was dead set that I was going to leave and be a coach for students. That's what I thought. I wanted to be an academic coach. That's what I wanted to do. And through the coaching process and like being coached in classes, I rediscovered my love of writing. I started a writing business that year that has been strong since. And then I started a writing coaching practice. And it was that self-awareness that I got from the program that helped. I would not be here today if it wasn't for that. And I think that self-awareness piece is probably the most, in my opinion, the most critical thing we do in coaching is we help our clients become more self-aware so that they can achieve the right goals, not just any arbitrary goal that they set for themselves. So I love so much that you said that. And it goes right perfectly into, you know, how do you manage those clients who maybe don't have that self-awareness, especially when they're not seeing themselves as part of the problem that maybe they're trying to solve if there's a problem that's in their way. So when you realize there's that lack of self-awareness in your clients and they're sort of missing maybe the mark, you know, you have a client, for example, who, you know, they say they want to fix communication at their company or their firm, but you're realizing like, oh, maybe some of the communication issues start with you. What are some of the strategies that you use to manage that, especially because it seems like it could be a little, you know, sensitive if they're not fully self-aware?
Yes, this can happen. It happens quite a lot. And I think one of the things we have to think about is what tools that we have to hand, because if somebody's in that place where they're not that self-aware, you know, it might be that they're kind of like the ACC client in a sense, you know, maybe they're not moved towards PCC or MCC in terms of that digging deeper within themselves. I think, once again, I've gone about Design the Alliance a lot, but I see my role in the Design the Alliance when I'm sharing the coaching process is I also talk about the fact that we, with leaders especially, will be focusing on emotional intelligence. You know, we're going to focus on those 4 components to start with self. For me, I run a lot of leadership programs with women, and a lot of the group coaching is called Leadership Starts with Self. So for me, I already have a segue in to ask the question because they know that that is kind of part of the program. I talk about it in the Design the Alliance, and I do talk about what a coaching session is going to look like. I talk about the fact that direct communication is a coaching tool, and at times I might be holding a mirror up to you, or I might be calling you out. Okay, so my role is I'm walking alongside you with a torch and I'm shining on the things that are going to trip you up. Yeah. Part of growth is me challenging you on those things that are a bit sticky or icky. I also talk about the fact that all of us are either active players in our life or sometimes a victim. And that doesn't mean I am calling you a victim. It just means I might challenge you on how you're going to become an active player in your own life. So because I have created that system and I talk about that in the Design Alliance, more than likely they're in a place where they're going to expect that from me. Yet, if we're still in that place, I am going to use either direct communication, or I'm going to ask a question, or I'm going to say, I made an observation here. You know, we're talking about the changes you want other people to make, or the things that you think need to be fixed. I want to bring it. Let's bring it back to you. I invite you to bring it back to yourself. So, you know, then I'll ask that question. What about you? What shift do you need to make? Or what kind of a leader do you want to be? Or what gaps are you seeing in others that you don't have? Or like, what strengths would you bring to help others shift? And I'll stop because I could just go on with these questions.
Oh, we love this. This has been great. I love what you said about the torch, because you said like, it's my job to sort of shine the light on things that might trip you up, including when you might be the thing tripping yourself up. And I feel like one of the things I talk to with the coaches in my classes a lot is there's going to be times, without a doubt, in a coaching session, you are going to have times that feel that stickiness, that feel a little maybe intense, or you're directly addressing something in somebody that might feel, you know, shocking to them, or they might not have observed in themselves. And to the coaches who, you know, shy away from that or feel like, oh, I don't want to do that, I don't want to upset someone, the lens through which I see it is I'm doing my client a disservice if I don't point out how they are getting in their own way. Because it is my job, just like you said, to hold that light up and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. Here's what's in the way. Here's what's in the way. How are we addressing all these things? But if that's them, it's still equally my job to point that out and say, you are still, now you're the thing getting in your way. So how do you want to change or adjust or develop strategies or what have you, so that you don't become your own roadblock? So I love that you said that, because I think it really highlights that it is our role to be in these uncomfortable situations sometimes, and to feel comfort and our sort of confidence, in that uncomfortable space, because reminding ourselves that we are doing this for our clients, and we're coming from a place of wanting them to have that growth and achieve those goals. So I love that. I love that you said that. And I'm just curious, like, when you think about it from that perspective too, you know, how do you, I guess more like, yeah, how do you see yourself, or how do you see your clients change or adjust when you do that direct communication?
It reminds me of what John said once. He said that direct communication is a form of empathy. So for me, I know it's part of my purpose and passion and my mission, just like you're saying. And if I think about the coaching that I've had, sometimes actually the biggest growth and shifts I've had is when my coach called me out. And I've had coaches who've been really prickly with me, really called me out. And I know we don't have a lot of time. I'll just give you an example. I remember once used to be really stuck in my own head about comparison and worrying about what people were thinking. And, you know, after I had done something or presented or shown up, or the role that I was in, really thinking about what other people were saying. And my coach, she said to me once, she said, what makes you think you're so important? And I was like, what? Whoa. It made me burst out laughing. In essence, she was telling me the whole world didn't revolve around me, and I needed to get out my own head, and I needed to get out of ego. And I still laugh about it, and it really helps me to think about, yeah, what makes me think everything revolves around me? Actually allowed me to let it go. I mean, that was her style, prickly, really direct. I use a lot of humor with direct communication. And it also depends on my client. I have clients that tell me in Design Alliance, I want you to kick my ass. Some like, I want you to go a little bit soft, a little bit easy with me. Please challenge me with love. But I think once you learn to groove and flow with someone, and you know their style, and you know kind of the things that are important to them. You know, it could be a book, it could be a movie, it could be a superhero. You know, I mean, it could be I'm working with someone who's a Marvel fan, and I can use direct communication with them and say, sounds like Thanos is here, you know, like, what are you trying to, what is your ego saying right now?
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I think that really sums up nicely, you know, the idea that we we are the mirror. And sometimes when you look in the mirror, you don't love what you see. And that's not and that's not to say there's anything wrong with that. It's just the awareness of knowing like, ooh, okay, you know, sometimes I look in the mirror and I think to myself, you know what, I could have done better today, you know? And it's like, okay, well, how, but I don't, through coaching and all that stuff, like now I don't harp on that as much. Now I think, okay, if I could have done better today, that means that there's room for improvement tomorrow. So what am I going to do tomorrow that's going to make my day better or help me move towards my goals or what have you? So I think, you know, having that mirror mentality is really a really lovely way to think about things. And so I know we're like just out of time, but I'm curious, like if you had to sum up, you know, today's conversation, what would be the one takeaway you would hope that people would get from this sort of conversation about difficult participants or clients?
I think it's just meet people where they're at and whatever that means for where they're at. It could be revisiting the Designing Alliance. It could be coaching isn't right for them. I've had to fire clients. We'll talk about that some other time. But you're really stepping into their world. Meet people where they're at, step into their world, seek to understand.
I love that. I think for me, the takeaway would be um, if I had to put it in like one sentence, it's the importance of self-awareness for both you and your client. So your self-awareness about yourself, your self-awareness about what your client needs, and then your self-awareness, and then your client's self-awareness about themselves. All of those things are important in a coaching session. And so that'll help you make determinations about how to manage these difficult or challenging moments in coaching. So yeah, thank you for all of your insight into this very interesting topic that comes up a lot in classes.
Thank you, Britt. It's been a pleasure. I've really, really enjoyed chatting to you.
Yes, same. Women's empowerment.
Absolutely. All about that.
That's
I hope
right.
we can connect again soon or maybe even have a panel of people or
Yeah.
women in the future.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great.
All right. Well, thank you. And thanks, everyone. Thank you for listening in. Please listen to the replay afterwards. Send us any questions that you've got, any burning things that you want to ask us, and we will all aim to respond to you and answer. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.